Welcome to ReThink You, bringing you ideas, inspiration, and motivation to start living the life you were created to live. Here is your host, author, trainer, speaker, and coach, and founder of ReThink You, Kim Levings.
Well, hello and welcome back to the ReThink You podcast. I'm Kim Levings, and I'm excited to bring you today another fabulous guest. Judy Herman is an innovative mental health therapist who helps women in leadership gain personal and professional confidence. With mastermind groups, coaching, and counseling, they get strategies and support to create the income and the lifestyle freedom that gives clarity to their purpose. Judy is the author of the wonderful book called Beyond Messy Relationships, which I just finished reading. It really is like therapy in a book. Any of you who are in a relationship and want to know more, or perhaps you've exited a relationship and want to know more, I highly recommend Judy's book. And along with transitioning from private practitioner to public speaker, Judy loves outdoor activities and adventures with her grandchildren. And I was blessed to meet Judy during one of our mastermind groups, and I'm excited to bring her today. So, Judy, I know, having read your book, that there's a whole lot more to that story, but why don't you kick us off? Tell us more about yourself and tell us your story.
I'm so glad to be here. Kim, this is such an honor. Thank you so much. And I'm so honored too that you read my book, because I feel that people who read my book, they really know me, maybe in ways they would never know me before. So really it's therapists who write books, usually write the intense and dramatic stories of their clients and not themselves. But I decided to be a client in my own book. So my story is, everybody's got a story, right? We started in the beginning, right? That I grew up in a very conservative faith denomination, in which you learn a lot of don'ts. You don't smoke, you don't drink, certainly don't have premarital dancing. Well, I got married at the age of 22, and I bore 4 children in that marriage. And as time went on, there was no growth in the marriage. It was becoming toxic, the interactions. And so that 30-year marriage did end in divorce. But through that time, I'm trying to fit my life, Kim, into this box that I didn't quite fit into. I did remarry, and then, had my grown children, had their kids, and my second husband had a severe mental illness, yet he had years of wellness. We met through ballroom dancing. He was a mental health advocate, and we had several years together. And the catalyst actually for me writing Beyond Messy Relationships was my journey of becoming more aware and realizing this is something I think is a lifelong journey for me and for a lot of people, how to get away from the illusion that you can do for others what only they can do for themselves. So yes, and I'm a mental health counselor, but I haven't always been a mental health counselor and relationship expert, because my first career was actually raising 4 kids in a troubled marriage. That was a full-time job. But I'm here, and it's through my journey of the losses, of the guilt and the shame and all the things that were wrapped up. And before I go on and on, I kind of want to take a pause, because I could tell you much more, but there is much more in the book.
I love it. Yes, we want to encourage people to read the book, but it's powerful. So, but Judy, tell us, so you are a licensed therapist right now. What made you choose this as a career? How did that fit into your story? How did you end up doing what you're doing now?
And that is also a very intense and dramatic story. So when I was 16, I made a very poor decision, and with hormones raging, a lot of teenage girls get pregnant, and that was the case with me. Well, that pregnancy did end in an abortion, and this was like in the mid 70s, when it was like just newly legalized, but there was a whole lot of shame. I was told that day, let's forget this day ever happened. And honestly, I put a lot of good things. I mean, you can either go one of two ways as far as your coping mechanisms go and your denial and all of that. But some people go into drugs and alcohol. Well, I was going to just be hyper religious. And that's basically not, I didn't just decide to do that, but that's the path that I took. Just really trying to, I think subconsciously, if I do all these good things, if I go on this mission trip, if I do this and if I do that, that will outweigh this. And there was a lot of guilt and shame. Well, there was a day I had two little girls. They were little toddlers, and I was married to my first husband. And I woke up one day and Kim, I cannot tell you any kind of catalyst that brought this to light. But I was very, very well versed in scripture. But the scripture that came out in the New Testament, it's in James, it says, confess your faults one to another. And I woke up though one day, and it was almost like an out of body experience. I thought, what am I doing here? I looked around and I saw my marriage, which I thought and it was a beautiful marriage. There's like, when you go through a troubled marriage, it's not all in one bundle, a troubled marriage. There's seasons of health and well-being. But I looked at my life and I thought, what am I doing here? I've got these two little girls. I didn't know myself. So this was like actually in my early 30s. And so really since my own experience and then counseling with clients, there's a lot of things that happen when you're in your early 30s, like awareness. I think there's something that happens in the brain where we have insight, and it can cause such deep depression, and a lot of people get stuck. What happened with me was my husband did not know that I had this secret, thought that I was a virgin when we got married. And so I did tell him, but there's a very dramatic and intense, I keep using that word, dramatic and intense. It was a spiritual awakening that I had. I mean, it was difficult, probably one of the most difficult things up until that time that I ever did, taking a risk of telling him. But at that time, it was like God used him. And he looked at me and he put his arms around me, and I felt the arms of Jesus, the physical arms of Christ around me. It was like that was a turning point. So going back to your original question, how did I go into mental health? Well, I got involved with post-abortion recovery through my local crisis pregnancy center. And I did a lot of volunteer work and shared my testimony publicly, speaking in churches, leading groups, leading retreat experiences that were so transformational. And I realized that when people are dealing with such depth of shame and guilt, because there's two things about abortion recovery. You have the guilt and the shame around it, but then we also have to grieve the child that was lost. So it's kind of like these two things are all wrapped up, and to be able to separate them and be able to grieve. So that was like very enlightening to me, in fact. And I had, it helped me to be able to grieve my aborted baby, to name my aborted child, and to have a memorial service. Actually, that just tuning into that reality that I would see that child someday helped me to love my living children. But it was so I guess to go back is, I know that there's a lot of people in different circumstances, and abortion recovery or any kind of traumatic recovery doesn't come in this neat little package where you just unwrap it. There's so many layers of things. So that was a catalyst of me getting further training to become a therapist. And at that time that I decided to do that, it was like I had 4 kids. And I thought, okay, Lord, what can I empty off my plate here? I don't know how I did it, but anyway, there was that insight, and here I am today.
That is powerful. One thing I wanted to comment on, Judy, and you having told the story here, but I think that you are to be commended to have done what you did, to go and get qualified and do that kind of volunteer work and almost reveal yourself to the world. As you said, it was that catalytic turning point. And I certainly know for myself, when I was able to talk about my suicide attempts and my depression, it sets you free of it. It takes it out of the darkness and shares it with the world. And then we are called to do something with that. And, certainly you've gone on to do that. And, I'm really glad that you are mentioning this, because I realize how many people struggle with guilt and shame of the hidden stories, and being able to reveal them and heal from them. And I'm sure that along the way, so let's just sort of continue to camp out on the personal journey, and, talk to me a little about the life lessons that, just pick a few, because I know you could write another book on life lessons, but maybe just share with us a couple of life lessons during that chapter of your life when you first became a therapist and when you were doing this volunteer work. What were some of the lessons that life taught you from that chapter?
Wow, there's a whole lot of life lessons. I think so. In my book and in my counseling and in my life, there's this acronym that has come up. It's a formula, and it's breathing fresh air. And the A is awareness, like increasing in your awareness. I is an intentionality. Nothing happens, no change happens if you have no plans, but you've got to take time to pray, meditate, and plan. And the R is risks of growth. Now, if we went right to the R, we could make some really foolish decisions, but the risks of growth do count on awareness and intentionality being before that. So what I've learned is early on, I guess, and again, in my mid 30s or so, and moving forward, it was this leap of faith, like you face your greatest fear, and then you realize on the other side, there's freedom. When I gave my testimony for the first time, going through the post-abortion recovery, and I gave my testimony to 400 or so people for their fundraising banquet, I was amazed. Number one, I was just shaken to the core, thinking, well, I walk off this stage and I won't be able to look anybody in the eye, but it wasn't that way at all. People came up to me and shook. I mean, there was a line of people, and several women were saying, that happened to me too. Thank you. So it was amazing, Kim, to know that there's freedom. And so anytime since that time, going through heartache, I've leaned into the emotions. I've let them flow through. I've journaled about them. And there's so many times I have felt stuck. But every stage in life does, and growth requires for us to lean into that. And so when you get scared, it's like that's part of it, right? You lean into that fear and you just move forward. So these yucky emotions that I was dealing with, anxiety, fear, and seasons of depression, almost welcoming them as if, okay, they've got messengers here. They're tuning into, I got to listen to them. Like you honor them. They're honored guests in your soul, and they have something to tell you. And then that raises your awareness. It's not so scary. So many people get like, they think that if they start crying, they're not ever going to be able to stop. Or they think if they get anxious, that they're not ever going to stop getting anxious. We need to learn that this is an invitation. So actually the subtitle of my book is Divine Invitations to Your Authentic Self. And so that's kind of in a nutshell. And that's been my journey so far.
That's fabulous. Yeah, I love you unpacking that acronym, because it is such an important one and so easy to remember. And I really like what you said about the emotions, that they're temporary guests and we honor them. We just don't let them take root. We don't let the emotions take over and sort of set up camp in your life, but you welcome them as transit guests that are just passing through, as you say in the book. Other life lessons. So that was a huge one, that ability to be transparent, and the ability to give in and acknowledge and honor the emotions as part of the process of personal growth. What other lesson would you like to share?
Oh, I've got so many. So when I became a therapist and I decided to specialize in relationships and marriages, that was a huge thing. So I'd gotten trained in, it's called imago therapy. Some of you are familiar with that. Some of your listeners may be, and also the Gottman method. So early on, I was still a single woman in between my two marriages. And I wanted to, there was something in me, Kim. I wanted to figure out that first marriage. How could that first marriage, could I have done this? Could I have done that? I think that's just part of it. When we go through a loss, whether that's the loss of a marriage, whether that's the loss of a loved one, we keep thinking, what could I have done different? And could this marriage have lasted? So in my quest to really understand my past marriage so that I didn't make another mistake again, I did go through additional certification and training in imago therapy. And it was within that context also that I did meet my second husband, we had such great chemistry together. I met him through our ballroom dance community. And so as far as the journey here, I spent a whole lot of time doing grief work and doing the post-abortion recovery and all that grief there, all the grief with the marriage and the hopelessness. And you think, oh, if I just do this, or if we just go to that marriage conference, or we just do, this retreat, or we just go to this counselor, we did I kept on having hope there would be change, because if he was able to hold me years before and just really be a picture of this love and grace of God in my life, certainly this is going to happen again. But it takes two. So that's a life lesson. It takes two people to be married. It took me a long time to figure that one out. All right. So I get remarried, but I have now this knowledge. And then my husband, Joe, and I had such wonderful chemistry together. And we had fun and we had adventures. I love I think, as far as if any of your listeners are familiar with the Enneagram. I don't know if you are familiar with the Enneagram. I think for the longest time, I thought I was another number or several other numbers, but I think I'm a 7. Like the 7 is the person who needs to have adventure, who needs to have fun. Now that might be kind of surprising that a counselor has that kind of a number on an Enneagram. But anyway, so Joe really opened up kind of like my black and white things need to fit into this theological box world. Then he made color come alive, and we did have fun together. Now I knew beforehand that he had had years of wellness from his bipolar disorder. He had gone to his doctors. He had, he was a mental health advocate, in fact, and led bipolar support groups, highly functioning. And, this irritability would show up. But you see, that's part of the dance of the first marriage as well. Me trying to kind of make sure everything's okay. Now in my book, I talk about relationship dances, right? And so some of this stuff would show up and I'd say, wait a minute, is this Joe's a different man? But just to make a long story short, that, you'd think as a mental health therapist and doing all the studying and all the things that you would think that first time, 4.5 years into the marriage, which was his first psychotic episode. I'd never seen it before. I'd heard the stories, but never seen it in real life. And I really trusted that he knew himself and had enough self-awareness that he would know that there's this high energy, hyper religiosity. And I'm thinking, oh, this is really the spiritual awakening is what I was thinking. But what it was a season, Kim, a season of psychosis. And oh, that was dark. It was dark. Now, he's never been suicidal or homicidal or anything like that, but he has these grandiosity, and I don't know if I need to explain any more about what psychosis is, but out of tune with reality, in which he wasn't safe and had 2 inpatient hospitalizations and a near-death auto accident that made me nearly a widow, or at that time, a twice divorced relationship therapist. But it was the second episode that was the catalyst for me to write my book. I'm going to take a pause there. I'm saying probably too much.
No, that's fabulous. And as I said, I do want people to read the book, but you said some powerful things there, Judy, that I really want to call out. But I actually want to go back to a few minutes ago when you were talking about the guilt and shame that's associated for women who've gone through an abortion experience, and sometimes the guilt and shame that's attached to a divorced woman, having gone through a marriage that's failed. I know my definitions, but I'm not as qualified as you. So I would love it if you would unpack for people, what is the difference between guilt and shame? Because there is a difference, and I don't know that everybody understands that.
I'm so glad you asked. So if we were to imagine a continuum line across the screen here, and think of geometry class, where you can go in infinity in either direction, and we have so we have maybe right choices on one side and wrong choices on the other, or we have reality or fantasy. So we're somewhere on that line. So the reason and so just imagine you're an X somewhere on the line. Now, whatever direction we're facing will make a difference. So guilt is designed to be a temporary emotion to turn us in the direction of, if we're in this, or if we're heading out of tune with reality or out of tune with rightness, then it's to give us, about face so that we can go in the direction of doing the next right thing. So we can say, oh, that, it turned you around. You don't need that same guilt. Well, here's a problem, is that we have either true guilt or we have false guilt. False guilt would be those things that are imposed upon you that are not really wrong to do. It's kind of like in my Baptist, I shouldn't say Baptist, but in my very conservative, because I don't want to offend anybody, but in my very conservative Christian faith, yeah, you don't dance, or you don't have premarital dancing, right? Well, some people might believe that it's still wrong to do that. But anyway, that's an example of an imposed guilt thing. Okay, so we've got to discern whether it's true or false. And then then the difference between that and shame is that you're an awful person. Like, you identify so much with that wrong thing, or that, getting out of tune with reality so much that you identify that, oh, I'm such a loser, or, oh, I'm such a failure, or, oh, I'm this, or I'm that. So it's making a personal identification with that happens. Now, I will tell you this, just because we're all human beings, right? We all have shame that shows up, right? We need to become shame resilient. For a person who has no shame whatsoever, it's probably psychopathic, right? So shame shows up. We learn how to not identify ourselves with it. As a Christian, Christians believe Christ bore our shame on the cross, but most Christians don't live that way. So knowing the difference can be very freeing, and it's just kind of easier talked about than it actually is. So sometimes we just need some help with that.
Right. Thank you, Judy, for that explanation, because I love to say to folks, Zig Ziglar had that great quote where he said, failure is an event, not a person. Is a key example, because that emotion of guilt is a temporary emotion to say, hey, whatever you've done is not right, or that was a mistake, or this is not a good choice, and, to turn you around. But shame is that self-deprecating labeling, identifying yourself. So thank you for unpacking that. And I know too, Judy, that many things, and I'm a coach, you're a counselor, therapist. We come from this where we are great at speaking truth in other people's lives, but we're not always great at walking our talk, right, in our own lives. So tell me about a time that perhaps you got off the beaten path a little, and before you knew it, you were so deep in the forest, you couldn't see the trees. And how do you tend to get yourself out of those jams when you do get lost and you make the wrong decisions, or you realize you're off track? How do you get yourself back on track?
Wow, what a great question that is. I might have been off track for about 11 years here, Kim. And yeah, so you think you can get yourself out simply? I think it can be so subtle for a lot of people, in other words. And I think it is a subtle thing. Now, have I gone to the point where, I've not had a problem with drinking, or it's not even, an issue with me, or drugs or anything? I can't really put my finger on any of those, what do you call risky behaviors that teenagers do, drugs, sex, and alcohol. None of that, but it's likely staying in relationships or in a marriage longer, way past their due dates, way past their, I should say, expiration dates. So I think there's a lot of things that when you surround yourself with people and they're telling you the truth, you got to be ready to hear it. You got to be ready to hear it, don't you?
That's so true. Yeah, being ready to hear it, being willing to hear the feedback from others. And I wanted to sort of throw back to you, because I'm sort of reflecting the listeners here. And I read this in the book, and at the time I kind of chuckled, and you just said it now when you said, it's not so much that marriage is bad, it's just they have an expiration date. And then immediately the conservative Christian would say, but marriage is for life. You are bound to each other for life, and marriage should not have an expiration date. And there's so many ranges of thought on this. So how would you speak, because I know that my take, I'm also a divorced woman, and okay, I've never remarried. And I said, there's a reason for that. I choose to be really happy in my singlehood right now. And I have been for a long time. And I know for some folks that perhaps divorce and exiting marriage is just a little too easy. We've kind of swung in the opposite direction. And it's like, well, we'll get married, and if it doesn't figure out, we can always get divorced. It's like it's become a very temporary thing. And I don't think that's what God designed us for. So, and I know I'm challenging you on this, but I just know that statement, well, sometimes marriages have an expiration date, will bring up some natural resistance to those who've been steeped in traditional religious approaches to marriage and the Bible definition of marriage. So what is your comment on that, knowing your background and knowing your information? And I hate to put you on the spot, but I know these are questions that listeners are asking.
Oh, I love you. I love it that you're putting me on the spot. Here's what I believe. So a woman who's been married for 40 years, yes, I've had 2 husbands. I do not take getting out of a marriage lightly whatsoever. I think there's some people that shouldn't get married in the first place. And so and that was the thing that really I struggled with for a long time, is my theology around marriage. Yes, I did. All of us would go to the altar and we say, I do. None of us believe that we're going to get a divorce. And I don't, I really had to struggle with that. And also one of my grown children had to struggle with that, with mom now. So, here I am, a therapist, I should know better. I am divorced twice now, and that's not something I ever wanted. So I just really want to honor people who do believe in divorce. I do not, or don't believe in divorce. I don't believe in toxic marriages, because Christ died for the individual, and marriage is an institution. I do honor it. There's some people that can do it well, very few, but there are. And everybody does have seasons of messiness in their relationship. If they're not, then they're ignoring it. And then there's other undercurrent stuff that's going on. But the bitterness and the anger and the resentment and the 4 horsemen that Dr. John Gottman talks about is, as long as you're feeding those horses, you're actually going to shorten your life being in a toxic marriage. And some are actually in a marriage, it is shortening. It's like they're not living together, they're dying together. And Christ has given us life and given it to us abundantly. So I so believe in the dignity and value and worthiness of the individual. And I believe that God's plan is for us, because he built us in such a way that we long to be felt, to feel felt by our loved one. So if you're living with someone who doesn't have that ability, right? And maybe it's also individual. It's like, so every individual case is different, but there are, I just cannot, encourage toxicity, power over. There's so many, and those are a lot of folks that do come to me are struggling with very toxic marriages.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you for letting me challenge you on that. Because as I said, I know there's a lot of opinions out there, and I agree with you that I don't think God ever intended us to be miserable and, in a life-sucking relationship, where everything is just going downhill, and that toxicity that impacts you. Talk to me a little, Judy. I know that you've had extensive experience in relationships, obviously, and in marriages. And now we sort of touched on abortion. Let's sort of address the single folks that are perhaps considering marriage. And what would your advice be? Have you ever counseled premaritally? And how do you approach that? So, just a couple of minutes just on that, because I know that we have a lot of people listening who are single, and they're like, oh, so we don't lose them. I want them to hear your wisdom regarding what goes on prior to marriage and how to make that choice to be married.
Yes. Well, really, here's another thing I did learn too. First, it does take 2 to be married. And you as a human being, you as an individual, your partner as an individual need to be willing to grow and grow up. Okay. Now, in my second marriage, it simply got to a point. I want to just kind of go back, if you don't mind me sharing this, Kim,
Sure.
is that it was not a viable marriage. It wasn't viable. Okay. So if you're dating someone and you're the first person that maybe they say you've had a successful relationship, if they have no track record of doing relationships well or learning or growing from it, like if you're dating somebody and they start talking about their ex, about how crazy they were, that's like not a good sign. That's a red flag. So we need to make sure that there's been, with whatever you've been through in your life, that there's been growth, but it takes a quality of being willing to breathe that fresh air, that awareness, that growing awareness. Do you as a human being have this? Can you look back on your life and see what your life lessons have been, right? Have you discovered some values that are very precious to you? And because here's what happens, I need to share this. When we get into a new relationship, what happens is, like, there's all kinds of chemicals and surges of dopamine and serotonin. And this person that you're dating can they make you feel so alive, bigger than life. Well, your brain's on drugs, basically. It wears off after 3 months. Okay. So get your head clear and get yourself surrounded with people who can really speak wisdom into your life. Do not ignore the red flags and be really choosy, because you deserve to be well loved. I really believe that everybody in this world has been born into this world to give and to receive love. And that's so important. So if you are single and you plan on not ever being in a relationship, it's so important to also to have some, what you call, attachment friendships, people who do know you. And I'm actually just entering this phase. You've been in this phase for a long time, Kim, but it's like, wow, I'm getting to know myself in ways I never got to know myself before. Does that help maybe to the single?
Yes, absolutely. And it's what I say, that you need to be a whole person. And I love that I was going to actually ask you that question about what I call the romance chemicals and how they mess with your brain. And I think we've all experienced that feeling. And, speaking to my own story, my father was always my litmus test, because he would meet somebody and say, well, this is definitely not a good thing, or this is a good thing. So if I was still in that romance, if I was still stuck in the dopamine fog, I wouldn't take anyone to meet my father, because I didn't want him to create any reality check for me. I allowed myself to enjoy the bubble for a while before I would take this person to meet my father. And I think that we all have certain sort of benchmarks in our lives that we can use to evaluate those relationships to help protect us. And you're right, we're all here to be loved and to love, and however that looks in whatever type of relationships you have. And to not, I think another thing, and maybe we can sort of start winding down with this final question. I think another mistake people make sometimes is they try to there's two mistakes, in my opinion, that people make. The first one is that they try to marry somebody and then change them to meet their expectations, saying, oh, I know he's got that problem, or she's like that, I can fix that. That's a huge red flag. Yes. And also the fact that, I need to be with this person in order to be complete, so when people say, oh, you complete me, I'm like, oh, that's a big mistake. You need to be complete, whole, and ready before you engage in a relationship, because nobody's going to make you whole. So those are two things I've just seen from a non-expert point of view. Is there anything else that I've missed in that summation, Judy?
No, I think you are spot on, Kim, with those two things for sure, because we've learned this from our mentor, haven't we, Kim? Like, working on yourself is a full-time job, right? Yes. And so what we want to do is we want to have what you call an interdependent relationship, right? Rather than a codependent relationship. Like, if you have anxiety and your partner is calm, and then the relationship isn't really like you're seeing them as your medicating behavior. Instead, like, you have to take this pill and anti-anxiety and it's the relationship. That's not cool, because you're really using that person. You're not really seeing them as their whole beings. And so we are each responsible. Like, I can only feel in my body what I feel, and I need to develop the coping skills for my own body. So in other words, if your partner's saying to you, you make me so angry and don't do X, Y, and Z, well, that anger is theirs. You may have triggered something. Now, you don't want to push buttons on purpose or anything like that. But what I'm saying is that person has an anger problem, and it's theirs to deal with, not yours. Okay. And so knowing what's yours to own and what's not yours to own. And see, honestly, I think we all learn, we have these lessons in life, but you keep learning them at different levels, right? I mean, I know that you cannot do for others what only they can do for themselves, but then we subconsciously think we can, right? It's just, there's a lot of subconscious stuff that's going on, but I think you are spot on. And then there's 4 horsemen. I don't know if I told you what those were, that John Gottman talks about. If you've got, so it's defensiveness, it's accusation, defensiveness, and stonewalling and contempt. And as long as you're feeding all those horsemen, you need to, I mean, there might be something that you're used to from your family of origins, because what we do, however we learn to relate in our family of origins while our brains are being developed, and it happens, then we take them into our adult relationships. So being able to sort out what we needed as kids to survive to what is now, whoa, this is so not good. This is like a weapon against my partner to keep doing what I've done. So getting that kind of awareness, and again, we're talking about bringing to a level of awareness the stuff that is going on subconsciously.
Right. So important. And as everyone knows, I'm a thinking coach, so I'm always tinkering around what are those belief patterns in the subconscious. So I'm pleased that you mentioned that, because we do bring our baggage with us wherever we go. And that personal growth is about learning to manage your baggage. So Judy, thank you. Wow, there's just so much to talk about. And I'm excited for those of you who are following the Life Mastery series. I've invited Judy to teach the class on Master Your Relationships at the end of April. So watch out for information on that. But Judy, to come back to you, my final question is, what are you focused on right now? What are you really excited about for the rest of this year in 2021?
Oh my goodness. I didn't know when this is going to be aired, but certainly speaking engagements. And yes. I don't know, maybe by the time I will have already spoken on the 6th of March, but yes, I'm so excited about my message. And I want to get my message out into the world. I think where I am at this stage of my life, having gone through the risk of getting that baby out in the world, I want it to get it into the hands of readers. I'd like to get it into the hands of other therapists and into universities even, and get my message out, but get my verbal message and let people experience there is your vibrantly authentic self is waiting for you beyond messy relationships. And there are so many life lessons. So yes, I'm getting myself where as soon as we're all able to travel, right? I want to travel and speak, and also start working on my next book. Yeah.
Wonderful. What is the next book going to be about, Judy?
I knew you were going to ask that. The problem is, Kim, I've got about 5 books in my head. No, but honestly, there's people that read Beyond Messy Relationships, and they are asking what next. So what I plan to do is flesh out, because I do show up as a therapist at the beginning of each of the chapters. So I want to flesh out a person's next step and what they do as a result of having read this, being exposed. Okay, if this therapist has been through all that, then I can do something here, and what their next step is. And so have it be more of and this one's kind of like a mixture of memoir and also me showing up as a therapist, but one that the next book is definitely going to be more how to put this into practice, and how to recognize your authentic self, how to change the dances in your relationships, or how even to live the single life. Like, oh goodness, I'm learning a lot about that too, how to grieve and all of those things, and to move forward. Mm-hmm.
That's fabulous. Yeah, that's a great book. And so I want to also sort of come back. Judy mentioned that she's getting ready to speak on a summit. It's with Les Brown. It's the Power Women's Summit. It is airing this weekend. So this podcast will come out later, but I'm going to be sure to include the link to your summit talk. I'll make sure we put it in our show notes when we publish this episode. So if anyone wants to go and watch Judy's presentation at that summit, please do. And of course, if you haven't read the book, get it, because it's just rich with lessons for everybody about relationships. Any final thoughts, Judy? This has been such a pleasure.
Well, my final thoughts are for your listeners. Don't let anybody convince you that you are not worthy, because you are. You are. Make sure that you surround yourself with people who can affirm that you are worthy and deeply loved. And that's going to make a whole lot of difference. And I'm just very honored that you came and listened. So this is cool. You can reach me if you wanted to take a free relationship stress quiz. You can go to my website, judycounselor.com. And then I do have some add-ons for the book that if you do order, you can get it wherever books are sold in other formats and all. But I do have some add-on resources like questions to ponder and how to identify what your own defenses are and things like that. So yeah.
Great. Full of tools and resources. So yeah, Judy, judycounselor.com. And we'll have all that information in the show notes. So this has just been delightful, Judy. I've loved listening to your story, and thank you for all your great advice to everybody at whatever stage of their relationships they're in.